If you had asked anyone who knew us, they'd say we had the perfect life. We lived in a sprawling mansion in the best neighborhood, with every luxury at our fingertips. I had built a successful business from the ground up, one that allowed us to travel the world, dine at the finest restaurants, and live without a single financial worry. My wife, Emily, was beautiful, elegant in a way that made people turn their heads when she walked into a room. She had everything anyone could want: money, status, and a devoted husband. At least that's what she thought. I can't pinpoint the exact moment when things started to shift for me. Maybe it was the endless business trips or the way our marriage had settled into a routine, comfortable but monotonous. Or maybe it was the way I started to feel more like a provider than a partner, like a piece of the puzzle that kept the machine of our life running, but not someone Emily needed in the way she once had. I loved her, but somewhere along the way, the spark that had once ignited our relationship had faded. That's when she came into the picture. Her name was Claire, and she worked for one of my business partners. Claire wasn't like Emily at all. Where Emily was polished and poised, Claire was fiery, spontaneous. She had this energy about her that was intoxicating, like she didn't care about the rules everyone else followed. She was sharp, witty, and flirtatious in a way that both unnerved me and drew me in. I told myself that the attraction was harmless. After all, I was a married man, faithful man. But the more time I spent with Claire, the more I found myself looking forward to those moments we shared during meetings, the casual conversations that always seemed to carry a bit more heat than they should. It all started innocently, or so I convinced myself. The occasional text here and there, late-night phone calls under the guise of work. I kept it professional at first, but there was an undeniable tension between us, and I knew it wouldn't take much for things to cross the line. And eventually they did. It happened one night when I was away on a business trip. I had flown to London for a week of meetings, and Claire was there as well, representing her firm. The days had been filled with back-to-back meetings, negotiations, and presentations. By the time we wrapped up for the evening, I was exhausted, but instead of heading back to my hotel room, I found myself at the bar with Claire. We had shared drinks before, during work dinners and other events, but this time felt different. There was an undercurrent between us, something electric that neither of us had addressed but both of us had been feeling for months. We sat close, too close, exchanging glances that lingered a little too long. The alcohol loosened my tongue, and before I knew it, I was telling her things I hadn't even told Emily. How lonely I felt, how I sometimes wondered if I was just another cog in the machine of my own life. "I get it," Claire said softly, her hand brushing mine. "People see the money, the success, and think you've got it all figured out. But no one really understands the pressure." Her touch lingered on my hand, and I didn't pull away. That was the moment I should have stopped it, should have walked away. But instead, I leaned in. The kiss was soft at first, hesitant, as though both of us were testing the waters. But it didn't stay that way for long. The heat between us ignited, and suddenly, it didn't matter that we were in a crowded hotel bar, or that I was married. In that moment, I wanted her, and I didn't care about the consequences. We ended up in my hotel room that night. I don't even remember how we got there. The passion between us was overwhelming, drowning out every rational thought. All I could think about was the way her body felt against mine, how different she was from Emily, wild, uninhibited. For those hours, I forgot about everything. My wife, my responsibilities, the life I had built. It was just Claire and me, tangled in sheets, lost in a world where nothing else mattered. But when the morning came, reality hit me like a brick wall. I woke up before Claire, the sunlight filtering through the curtains, illuminating the stark truth of what I had done. My stomach twisted with guilt, and as I looked at her lying next to me, peaceful and asleep, I realized how far I had fallen. I had crossed a line I could never uncross. For the rest of that trip, I avoided Claire. I didn't know how to face her, or myself. The guilt gnawed at me constantly, a sharp, relentless ache that wouldn't go away. I thought about Emily, back at home, completely unaware of what I had done. I thought about the life we had built together, the promises I had made to her, and how I had broken them all in one reckless night. I told myself that it was a one-time thing, a mistake that I would never repeat. I just needed to get home, to put distance between me and Claire, and everything would go back to normal. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. When I got back to the mansion, Emily was waiting for me. She greeted me with a smile, wrapping her arms around my neck, and for a moment, I almost convinced myself that I could pretend, that I could act like nothing had happened, that I could bury the affair deep inside me and move on. But the guilt was unbearable. That night, as I lay in bed next to Emily, I couldn't sleep. I couldn't stop replaying everything in my mind. The kiss, the passion, the betrayal. Every time Emily reached for me, every time she smiled or said, "I love you," the weight of my actions pressed down on me until I thought I might suffocate. I had never felt so alone. Despite my resolve to end things with Claire, it didn't stop. She texted me the day after I got back, and instead of shutting it down, I responded. At first, it was just small talk, harmless messages that didn't mean anything. But the tension between us was still there, and it wasn't long before the affair started up again. It became a pattern: business trips, late-night meetings, stolen moments whenever we could find them. I told myself that I could keep it under control, that it was just physical, just a way to escape the pressure of my life for a little while. But it wasn't just physical. With every meeting, every touch, I found myself falling deeper into something I couldn't control. Claire was everything Emily wasn't. Free-spirited, adventurous, and completely uninhibited. She made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in years, like I was finally living for myself instead of for the expectations that had been placed on me. But at the same time, I knew I was playing with fire. The guilt never went away. It lingered in the background, a constant reminder that I was betraying the woman who had stood by me through everything. I started pulling away from Emily, emotionally distancing myself without even realizing it. I became colder, more distant. She asked me what was wrong, but I never gave her a straight answer. Couldn't. How could I tell her that the man she trusted completely had been lying to her for months? I don't know how long I thought I could keep it up, living two lives. But eventually, everything came crashing down. It was a Saturday afternoon, and Emily had gone out to lunch with some friends. I was at home, going through emails when I heard her phone buzz on the kitchen counter. First, I ignored it, but then it buzzed again and again. Curiosity got the better of me, and I walked over to check. It was a message from one of her friends, the kind of casual text that didn't mean anything. But as I went to set the phone down, a notification popped up from an unknown number. It was a message for me. I froze, staring at the screen. Claire had sent me a text, and it had synced with Emily's phone through our shared cloud account. My heart pounded as I quickly deleted the message, but I knew it was only a matter of time before Emily saw something I couldn't hide. That was the moment I knew everything was about to fall apart. I had betrayed the woman who loved me, the woman who had trusted me with her heart. And now, no matter how much I tried to bury the affair, the truth was about to come out. The minutes after deleting Claire's message were some of the longest of my life. My heart pounded in my chest, and my mind raced, trying to figure out how to fix the mess I had created. But I knew it was only a matter of time before Emily found out. I couldn't live like this anymore. Lying to her, living a double life, pretending that everything was fine when, deep down, I knew it was about to implode. When Emily came home from lunch later that afternoon, I could barely look her in the eye. She was cheerful, laughing as she told me about her day, completely unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. I watched her move around the house, and guilt twisted in my chest like a knife. This wasn't just a mistake anymore. It was a series of lies that had snowballed into something I couldn't control, and I was about to lose everything. That evening, as we sat down for dinner, I couldn't take it any longer. The weight of the truth was suffocating me. I had to tell her. I owed her that much. "Emily," I started, my voice shaky, "there's something I need to talk to you about." She looked up from her plate, her expression immediately turning serious. "What is it? You're scaring me." I took a deep breath, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear myself think. I've been hiding something from you. I've made a terrible mistake." Her eyes narrowed, confusion and worry etched across her face. "What are you talking about?" I've been unfaithful, I said, my voice barely a whisper. There's someone else. A woman I've been seeing. The silence that followed was deafening. Emily's face went pale, her fork dropping from her hand. For a moment, she just stared at me, as if she couldn't process the words I had just said. You what? She whispered, her voice trembling. You've been cheating on me? I nodded, unable to meet her gaze. I didn't mean for it to happen. Started on a business trip, and I never thought it would go this far. But it did. And I'm so sorry, Emily. Her expression shifted from shock to disbelief to anger in a matter of seconds. You're sorry? She said, her voice rising. You've been lying to me for months, and now you're just sorry? I know I've hurt you, I said, my voice breaking. I know I've destroyed everything, but I didn't want to keep lying to you. I couldn't live with the guilt anymore. Emily stood up from the table, her hands shaking, tears welling up in her eyes. How could you do this? After everything we've built together, everything we've been through? I trusted you, and you threw it all away for what? For some fling. It wasn't just a fling, I admitted, the truth spilling out of me like a flood. It became more than that. But it didn't mean that I stopped loving you. She scoffed, her eyes flashing with rage. You call this love? Betraying me, lying to my face every day, sneaking around behind my back? How dare you say you still love me after what you've done? I had never seen her so hurt, so broken, and it shattered me in ways I hadn't expected. Emily was the person I had vowed to protect, the person I had promised to be faithful to, and I had betrayed her in the worst possible way. Please, Emily, I said, my voice pleading. I know I've made the biggest mistake of my life, but I don't want to lose you. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. She shook her head, wiping away tears as she backed away from the table. Make this right? You can't just undo this, you can't take it back. You've already destroyed us. And with that, she turned and walked out of the dining room, leaving me alone in the wreckage of my confession. The days following my confession were a blur of emotional devastation. Emily barely spoke to me. She moved into the guest room, refusing to even look at me most of the time. The house, which had once been filled with warmth and laughter, now felt cold and distant. I could hear her crying sometimes, late at night when she thought I was asleep. The sound of her sobs cut through me like a knife, reminding me over and over of the damage I had caused. I didn't know what to do. I had destroyed the trust between us, shattered the foundation of our marriage, and I wasn't sure if it could ever be rebuilt. I wanted to give her space, to let her process the betrayal in her own time, but every moment apart made me feel like I was losing her even more. One evening, a week after the confession, Emily finally sat down with me in the living room. She looked exhausted, her eyes red from crying, but there was a quiet determination in her expression. I've been thinking, she began, her voice steady but cold, and I don't know if I can ever forgive you for what you've done. I don't know if I want to. My heart sank. I had expected this, but hearing it out loud felt like a death sentence. But, she continued, I also don't want to make any rash decisions. We've been married for a long time, and despite everything, I think we owe it to ourselves to try and figure out what comes next. I nodded, my throat tight with emotion. I understand. I'll do whatever you need, Emily. She looked at me, her eyes filled with pain. I don't even know what I need right now. All I know is that I feel like I don't even recognize the man I married anymore. Her words stung, but I knew they were true. I had become someone else, someone who had lost sight of the values that had once meant everything to me. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to earn back your trust, I said softly. But I know that's going to take time, and I know it might never happen. Emily looked away, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if it will. For the next few weeks, we lived in a state of limbo. Emily and I barely spoke, and when we did, it was only about the practicalities of our lives, bills, schedules, responsibilities. The emotional connection between us was gone, replaced by a wall of pain and betrayal that seemed impossible to break through. I threw myself into my work, trying to drown out the guilt and the emptiness that had taken over my life. But no matter how hard I worked, No matter how many hours I spent in the office, I couldn't escape the reality of what I had done. I had ruined my marriage, and I didn't know if I could ever repair the damage. Eventually, Emily suggested we go to marriage counseling. It wasn't a solution, but it was a step, one that she wasn't even sure would work, but one that I was willing to try. I knew I couldn't fix this on my own. I needed help, and I needed to show her that I was serious about trying to make things right. Our first session was uncomfortable, to say the least. The therapist asked us to talk about what had led to the affair, and I found myself struggling to explain something that I didn't fully understand myself. I don't know why I did it, I admitted, my voice shaky. I think I felt disconnected. From Emily, from myself. And when Claire came into my life, she offered an escape from the pressure, from the expectations. But that's not an excuse. I know that now. Emily sat there silently, her arms crossed over her chest, her expression unreadable. And you, Emily? The therapist asked gently. How do you feel about all of this? Emily let out a heavy sigh, her voice filled with exhaustion. I feel like I've been living a lie, like the man I thought I knew has been lying to me for months. I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust him again. And I don't know if I even want to try. Her words were like a punch to the gut, but I knew she had every right to feel that way. I had betrayed her in the worst possible way, and the path to redemption was going to be long and difficult. Over the next few months, we continued with therapy. There were moments of progress, small breakthroughs where we started to talk more openly, to address the cracks in our marriage that had existed long before the affair. But there were also setbacks, moments where Emily's anger and hurt resurfaced, and I was reminded of just how deep the betrayal had cut. Couldn't blame her. I had broken the trust that had taken years to build, and now I was asking her to rebuild it with me. I wasn't sure if I even deserved it. One evening, after a particularly emotional therapy session, Emily and I found ourselves sitting on the back porch, watching the sunset in silence. The air between us was heavy, but for the first time in months, it didn't feel unbearable. I don't know what the future holds, Emily said quietly, breaking the silence. But I do know that I don't want to make any decisions out of anger. I want to give us a real chance to figure this out. Her words were a glimmer of hope, a small but significant step toward something I wasn't sure I deserved. I'm grateful for that, I said softly, my heart swelling with a mix of relief and uncertainty. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right, Emily. But I know it's up to you. She nodded, her eyes still fixed on the horizon. I'm not ready to forgive you yet, but I'm willing to try. And with that, we sat together in the quiet of the evening, unsure of what the future held, but knowing that, for now, we were both still here, still trying. It wasn't a happy ending, but it was a beginning, a fragile, tentative beginning. After that evening on the porch, things didn't magically improve between Emily and me, but there was a shift. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was the beginning of something. A cautious willingness to try, to see if we could rebuild what had been so completely shattered. We were walking on fragile ground, unsure of each step we took. Our counseling sessions continued, and although they were difficult, they became a lifeline for us. For the first time, we began to talk about the deeper issues that had led us to this point. The emotional distance that had grown between us over the years, the way I had retreated into my work, and how Emily had felt increasingly isolated from me long before the affair ever happened. I felt invisible, Emily said during one session, her voice steady but filled with emotion. Like you stopped seeing me as a partner and started seeing me as just part of the life you were building. Everything was about your success, your business, your achievements, and I was just there, on the sidelines. Her words cut deep, but I knew she was right. I had been so focused on building the perfect life for us, on achieving financial success, on making sure we had everything we could ever want, that I had lost sight of what really mattered. Us. I didn't mean to make you feel that way, I said, my voice thick with guilt. I thought I was doing the right thing by providing for us, by making sure we had everything. But I see now that I lost sight of the most important thing, you. Emily nodded, but the pain in her eyes was still there. It wasn't just about the money or the lifestyle, though. It was about the fact that you stopped being present. You stopped caring about the little things, the things that made us who we were. And then you went and found someone else to fill that void. The affair was still the hardest thing for Emily to talk about, and I understood why. It was a betrayal so personal, so intimate, that it had cut her to her core. But I also knew that, in order to heal, we had to keep talking about it. We couldn't bury it and hope it would go away. I know I failed you, I said, my voice low. I know I can't undo what I've done, but I want to make it right. I want to be the man you deserve, the husband you deserve. Emily looked at me, her eyes searching mine for something. Maybe sincerity, maybe hope. I don't know if we can ever get back to what we had, she said quietly. But I think we can try to build something new, something different. That was the moment I realized that we weren't trying to go back to what we had before the affair. We were trying to build something entirely new, something that could withstand the weight of everything we had been through. It wouldn't be easy and it wouldn't be the same, but maybe, just maybe, it could be stronger. As we continued on our path toward healing, I learned that rebuilding trust was a slow, sometimes agonizing process. There were days when Emily would seem distant, when I could see the pain and doubt in her eyes. She would ask me questions about the affair, details that she hadn't asked before, and each time I answered as honestly as I could. It was brutal, revisiting those moments, but I knew that avoiding them would only make things worse. One evening, as we were sitting in the living room after dinner, Emily suddenly asked, "Did you ever love her?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. Claire had been a part of my life for months, and while I had convinced myself at the time that it wasn't about love, the truth was more complicated. "No," I said, my voice steady but sad. "I didn't love her, but I think at the time I convinced myself that I did, because I was looking for something that I felt was missing in my life. It wasn't real. It was a fantasy, but it was never love." Emily nodded slowly, processing my words. "I don't know if that makes it better or worse," she admitted. "I know," I replied softly, "but I want you to know that my feelings for her were never what my feelings for you are. What we have is real. What I had with her was an escape." Emily looked down at her hands, her expression conflicted. "I don't know if I'll ever fully understand why it happened, but I do want to try to move past it." Hearing her say those words felt like a step forward, even though I knew we had a long way to go. Trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild, and I had to be patient. I had to show her, through my actions, that I was committed to earning back what I had lost. Slowly, Emily and I began to find ways to reconnect. It started with small things. Taking walks together, having dinner without the distraction of phones or work, talking about our days like we used to. We made a conscious effort to spend time together, to be present with each other in a way that we hadn't been in years. One evening, Emily suggested we take a weekend trip, just the two of us. It had been years since we had taken time away together, and at first I wasn't sure if it was the right time. But I could see that she wanted to see if we could find each other again, away from the routine of our daily lives. We booked a cabin in the mountains, far from the city, far from the pressures of work and everything else. The drive up was quiet but comfortable, and as we arrived at the cabin, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. This trip wasn't going to fix everything, but it was a step, a chance to rebuild something new. The weekend was quiet and simple. We hiked, cooked together, sat by the fire in the evenings, and talked about things we hadn't discussed in years. It wasn't all serious. We laughed, shared stories from our early days together, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw Emily smile in a way that wasn't weighed down by sadness. One night, as we sat by the fire, Emily leaned her head on my shoulder, and I felt a warmth spread through me, something I hadn't felt in a long time. "I missed this," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Me too," I replied, wrapping my arm around her. "I don't want to lose this again." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and vulnerability. "Neither do I." For the first time in months, I felt like we were truly moving forward. We weren't healed, but we were healing. We weren't whole, but we were rebuilding. And that was enough. When we returned from the cabin, life didn't suddenly become perfect. There were still moments of doubt, moments when the past would creep up on us, and we'd have to work through the pain all over again. But there was also hope, something that had been missing for so long. Emily and I had made a decision to fight for our marriage, to rebuild what had been broken. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't always smooth, but we were committed. We had learned that love wasn't just about the good times. It was about staying when things got hard, about choosing each other even when it would have been easier to walk away. The affair had changed us, but it hadn't destroyed us. It had forced us to confront the cracks in our relationship, to face the truth about the things we had been ignoring for too long. And now we were stronger for it. We still went to counseling, not because we were struggling, but because we wanted to keep growing. We wanted to make sure that we didn't fall back into old patterns, that we continued to nurture the connection we had started to rebuild. One evening, after a particularly good session, Emily turned to me as we walked to the car and smiled. "I think we're going to be okay," she said, her voice filled with a quiet certainty. I smiled back, my heart swelling with gratitude. "I think so too." As we drove home, I realized that while the road ahead would still be long and difficult at times, we were on the right path. We were moving forward together, and for the first time in a long time I felt hopeful about the future. Even though we were slowly finding our way back to each other, the reality of our new normal meant living with the knowledge of the betrayal. The past wasn't something that could just disappear. Emily had started to trust me again in small ways, opening up more, laughing at my jokes, making efforts to rebuild intimacy. But there were still moments when I saw the doubt flicker in her eyes. I understood why. The damage I'd caused wasn't something that could be healed overnight, and even if we were working toward a better future, the scars of the affair would always be there. I found myself more aware of every action, every conversation. I made sure to communicate clearly about work trips, about where I was and who I was with. The transparency wasn't something Emily demanded, but something I offered willingly. I wanted her to know that I had nothing to hide anymore. I had learned my lesson the hard way, and I wasn't going to risk losing her again. One afternoon, while I was at work, I got a text from Claire. It was unexpected. After I had ended things with her months earlier, we hadn't spoken. It was a simple message, "How are you?" Seeing her name on my phone sent a rush of anxiety through me. I knew I couldn't engage with her, not even for a casual conversation. That chapter of my life was over, and I wasn't about to let it come back and haunt me. I deleted the message without responding. Later that evening, when I got home, Emily asked how my day had been. We had gotten into the habit of talking more openly about work, about our daily lives. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should tell her about the message from Claire. It hadn't meant anything, but I knew that keeping it from her would only make things worse in the long run. "I got a message from Claire today," I said quietly, watching her expression carefully. Emily's face tightened, the color draining from her cheeks. "What did she say?" "She just asked how I was." I didn't respond. I reassured her quickly. "I deleted the message right away." Emily nodded slowly, but I could see the hurt in her eyes. "I appreciate you telling me," she said after a long pause, "but it still stings to hear her name." "I know," I said, guilt washing over me again. "I'm sorry. I didn't want to hide it from you, but I also didn't want to upset you." Emily looked down at her hands, her fingers twisting nervously in her lap. "I'm glad you didn't hide it. It's just, I don't think I'll ever be okay with her. Even hearing about her makes me feel like I'm reliving everything." Her honesty was heartbreaking, but I knew it was part of the process. We had to face the hard truths, even if it meant revisiting the pain. "I promise I'll never speak to her again," I said, taking her hand in mine. "She's not a part of my life, and she never will be." Emily squeezed my hand, offering me a small, sad smile. "I believe you. It's just going to take time." And so, we continued to walk that delicate line between rebuilding trust and navigating the lingering hurt. It wasn't easy, but we were both committed to the process, even if it meant facing difficult moments like this one. One of the hardest things about the aftermath of the affair had been the strain it put on our physical relationship. Before everything had happened, intimacy had been a natural part of our marriage. But after the betrayal, it became fraught with tension. Emily wasn't sure if she could be close to me in the same way, and I understood that. How could she trust me with her body when I had betrayed her heart? For months, we had kept things light. Holding hands, hugs, occasional kisses, but nothing beyond that. I didn't push her. I knew that the emotional healing had to come first, and I wasn't going to rush her into anything she wasn't ready for. But slowly, as the months passed, we began to rediscover each other in new ways. It wasn't just about sex. It was about finding new ways to connect, new ways to be close. We started spending more time together, not just talking but really listening to each other. We shared our hopes, our fears, and even our regrets. One night, after a particularly deep conversation, Emily leaned into me on the couch and rested her head on my shoulder. It was such a simple gesture, but it felt monumental. For the first time in months, I felt like we were getting closer again. Not just emotionally, but physically. "I've missed this," she whispered, her voice soft in the quiet room. "I've missed it too," I replied, gently stroking her hair. "I don't ever want to lose this again." Emily lifted her head and looked at me, her eyes searching mine. "Do you think we'll ever get back to where we were before?" I hesitated for a moment, not wanting to give her false hope. "I don't know if we'll ever get back to exactly where we were," I admitted. "But maybe we can find something even better, something stronger." She smiled at that, a small but hopeful smile. "I'd like that." That night, we took another step forward. It wasn't a grand gesture, and it wasn't about rushing back into something we weren't ready for. It was about being close, about being present with each other in a way we hadn't been in a long time. It was a beginning, and it felt right. As things between Emily and me continued to improve, there was still one challenge we hadn't fully faced: the outside world. Our close friends knew something had happened between us. Our sudden distance hadn't gone unnoticed, but we had kept the details private. Emily had confided in her sister about the affair, but we hadn't told anyone else. Felt too raw, too personal to share. But as we started to heal, we knew that we couldn't keep hiding from the world forever. Our friends had started inviting us to gatherings again, dinners and social events, and while Emily was willing to go, I could tell she was nervous. I was too. The first event we attended together was a dinner at one of our close friends' homes. It was a small gathering, just a few couples, but it felt like a big step for us. As we walked in, I could feel the tension in Emily's body. She smiled and greeted everyone, but I could see the flicker of anxiety in her eyes. Throughout the evening, I stayed close to her, making sure she knew I was there, supporting her. Our friends were kind, not prying into what had been going on between us, but I could sense their curiosity. At one point, during a quiet moment, one of our friends pulled me aside. "You two seem better," he said, his tone careful. "Is everything okay now?" I nodded, though it felt like an oversimplification. "We're working on it," I said honestly. "It's been a tough year, but we're getting through it." He gave me a sympathetic nod, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "I'm glad to hear that. You've always seemed like such a strong couple. We were worried about you too." That night, as we drove home, Emily turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "It felt weird, being around everyone again," she admitted. "Like they all know something's wrong, but no one's saying it." "I know," I agreed, "but I think it'll get easier with time. We're not hiding anything, but we also don't owe them every detail of our lives." Emily nodded, but I could tell she was still processing it all. "I just hate that we have this thing hanging over us. I don't want people to look at us and see the affair." "They won't," I said softly. "They'll see how far we've come. They'll see us rebuilding." She smiled at that, and for the first time, I felt like we were truly moving forward, not just as a couple but as individuals. We were learning to live with the past, but we weren't letting it define us. As the months turned into a year since the affair, Emily and I had settled into a new rhythm. We had rebuilt trust in small, incremental steps. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments when the past would resurface, moments when Emily would ask me if I ever thought about Claire or when a business trip would trigger old anxieties. But we had learned how to navigate those moments together. We had also rediscovered a deeper sense of commitment to each other. The affair had forced us to confront the parts of our marriage that had been neglected, the ways in which we had drifted apart without even realizing it. Now, we were more intentional about our time together. We made sure to check in with each other, to talk openly about how we were feeling, and to never let the busyness of life get in the way of our relationship. One evening, as we sat together on the porch, watching the sunset like we had so many times before, Emily turned to me with a peaceful expression. "I think we've made it," she said softly, her voice filled with quiet contentment. "Made it where?" I asked, smiling. "Through the hardest part," she replied, resting her head on my shoulder. "I think we're going to be okay." I wrapped my arm around her, pulling her close. "I think so too." In that moment, I realized that we had come full circle. We had been through the darkest time of our marriage, and yet here we were, still standing, still together. It hadn't been easy, and there had been times when I wasn't sure if we would make it. But we had fought for each other, for our marriage, and for the life we had built. We weren't the same couple we had been before the affair. We were something new, something stronger, something more resilient. We had learned that love wasn't just about passion and romance. It was about staying when things got hard, about choosing each other even when it hurt. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the world around us, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. Gratitude for Emily's forgiveness, for her strength, and for the chance to rebuild what I had almost lost. We had made it through the storm, and now we were ready to face the future, together. The days following that sunset conversation were filled with a renewed sense of hope and purpose. Emily and I had come through the hardest time in our marriage, but now the focus was on making sure we didn't fall back into old patterns. We had learned, painfully, that even the most solid-looking relationships could crumble if neglected. Our connection was stronger than before, but it needed nurturing. One of the things we agreed on was making time for regular date nights again, something we hadn't done in years. They weren't always extravagant. Sometimes it was just cooking dinner together and watching a movie, but it was the intentionality behind it that mattered. It was about creating space for us, outside of the daily grind of work, responsibilities, and everything else. On one of these nights, we decided to go back to the place where we had our first date, a small, cozy restaurant in the heart of the city. As soon as we stepped inside, memories flooded back. I saw Emily smile, her eyes lighting up in a way that made my heart ache with nostalgia. It was like stepping into a different time, back to when everything between us was new and uncomplicated. "I can't believe we haven't been here in so long," Emily said as we sat down at our table. "I feel like it's been a lifetime." "I know," I agreed, taking her hand across the table. "But it's nice to come back, to remember where it all started." As we talked and laughed through the meal, it felt like we were rediscovering each other all over again. We reminisced about the early days of our relationship, the things that had brought us together, and the moments that had made us fall in love. It was easy to forget those things when life became overwhelming, but now, sitting across from her, I was reminded of why I had chosen her in the first place. "You know," Emily said, taking a sip of her wine, "despite everything we've been through, I think I love you more now than I did back then." Her words hit me in a way I didn't expect. I had spent so long trying to make up for my mistakes, trying to rebuild her trust, that I hadn't stopped to think about how much deeper our connection had become. The fact that she could say those words, after everything I had put her through, made me realize just how far we had come. "I feel the same way," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I'm so grateful that we didn't give up on each other." Emily smiled, her eyes soft with understanding. "I'm glad we didn't either." It was moments like this that made me realize just how much I had to lose, and how close I had come to losing it all. But instead of focusing on the past, we were focused on the future, on the life we were still building together. As the weeks passed, things between Emily and me continued to improve. We were communicating more openly, spending more time together, and reconnecting in ways that felt genuine and real. But life has a way of throwing curveballs, and we soon found ourselves facing a new challenge. One that had nothing to do with the affair, but tested our resilience all the same. It started with Emily not feeling well. At first, we both thought it was just stress or exhaustion, something that would pass with a bit of rest. But when the symptoms persisted, she decided to see a doctor, just to be safe. I wasn't prepared for what came next. The day after her appointment, Emily came home early from work, her face pale and tense. I knew something was wrong the moment I saw her. "Is everything okay?" I asked, my heart sinking as I walked toward her. Emily took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for mine. "The doctor found something," she said quietly. "They think it might be cancer." The world seemed to tilt beneath me, and for a moment, I couldn't find the words. Cancer? How was that even possible? Emily was healthy, vibrant, the last person I would have expected to face something like this. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice shaking. "How serious is it?" "They're not sure yet," she replied, her eyes filling with tears. "I have to go for more tests next week to confirm. But they said it's early, and if it is cancer, there's a good chance they can treat it." I pulled her into my arms, holding her tightly as she broke down in my embrace. This wasn't something we had ever imagined facing. After everything we had been through, it felt like the universe was testing us again, asking us how much more we could handle. But this time, we faced it together. In the days leading up to her tests, Emily and I spent as much time together as we could, trying to keep things as normal as possible. We went for walks, cooked dinner, and watched movies like we always did. But there was an unspoken tension between us, a fear that neither of us could shake. "What if it is cancer?" Emily asked one night, as we sat on the porch, her head resting on my shoulder. I didn't have an answer. All I could do was hold her hand and promise that, no matter what, we would face it together. "If it is," I said softly, "then we'll deal with it. We'll get through it, just like we've gotten through everything else." She nodded, but I could see the fear in her eyes. And truthfully, I was scared too. But I knew one thing for certain: we weren't the same people we had been a year ago. We were stronger now, more connected. And whatever came our way, we would face it as a team. A week later, we got the results. It was cancer, but the doctors were optimistic. It was early stage, and they had caught it in time. Emily would need surgery and possibly chemotherapy, but the prognosis was good. Still, the news hit us hard. Cancer wasn't something you could just wish away. It was a fight, and it was one we hadn't expected to face. But we were ready to face it together. The day of Emily's surgery was one of the longest days of my life. Sitting in the waiting room, I couldn't help but think about everything we had been through, how close I had come to losing her, not just to cancer but to my own selfish mistakes. And now, here we were, fighting for her life in a completely different way. When the surgeon finally came out and told me the surgery had gone well, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. But I knew the road ahead would still be difficult. Emily would need time to recover, both physically and emotionally, and I was determined to be there for her every step of the way. Over the next few months, we settled into a new routine. Emily started her treatment, and while there were days when she felt weak and exhausted, there were also days when her strength amazed me. She was a fighter, more resilient than I had ever given her credit for. We continued to go to counseling, not just for the affair but for everything we were going through now. It helped us stay connected, to talk about the fears and uncertainties that came with facing such a serious illness. And through it all, our love for each other grew stronger. One evening, as we sat on the couch, Emily turned to me with a smile. "You know," she said softly, "I've been thinking a lot about everything we've been through. The affair, the cancer, all of it." I looked at her, my heart swelling with admiration. "What about it?" "I think in a weird way it's made us stronger," she admitted. "I mean, I never would have wished for any of this, but I feel like we're closer now than we ever were before." I nodded, knowing exactly what she meant. "I feel the same way. I don't think I've ever loved you more." Emily smiled,